digress. Okay. So we're back with Deep Images, and we have most of the same crew we had in episode one. A few are not here or no longer with us, and we're going to talk about adaptations tonight. And one thing we've been talking amongst ourselves about this a lot, and this is something that I've talked a lot with a lot of cinephiles, especially my good friend Tim McLean. I want to give him a shout out. He's kind of a second set of eyes on the show. I send him everything, and he watches it. And just so y'all know, he's named all of y'all by name as being really good. And he's a film expert like Bill White was. And but Tim and I have been talking about this adaptation thing for years. Like what translates well, you know. Does it matter if it's completely faithful to the source material? That seems to be the main thing to like fanboys for most of the fan bros for most of the last few decades. But I think there's a lot of rethinking going on. I hope so anyway, that people who are just more into film will be able to see that this is a film on its own right. But it can be enhanced by the fact that it's based on something that actually honors that and translates that kind of vibe. And to me, sometimes the movie can be better than the source material. But usually people say the book's better. A lot of times it is. To me, sometimes they're complementary forces. And I used the example last time of Blade Runner. To me, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep and Blade Runner are complementary, two complementary texts that are equally brilliant in different media. But they're brilliant maybe for different reasons because they take the same story and kind of change the emphasis to what Dick or Ridley Scott, wanted it to focus on. And so I don't think you could just say, well, I hate Blade Runner because it's not just like Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. But a lot of people say they love Blade Runner and they don't care about Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. But let's dig a little deeper. If you really read Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep and you watch Blade Runner, which I'm sure everyone here has at least once, if not twice, 5, 20 times, it really is a lot like the book. But it depends on what you're looking for. And we had this discussion, Scott and I, the other day about the Planet of the Apes. I think Pierre Boulle book and the first movie are pretty close plot-wise, except for the ending twist. But then there's things like they live in modern cities. They wear modern clothes, like as we discussed the other day, as James Gunn took off one in Guardians of the Galaxy 3, where the new men aren't, wearing these scraggly armors. They're like looking like us. They're just animals. But that wasn't.
Yeah, a lot of the stuff from Escape from the Planet of the Apes, where Cornelius gets the suit and goes to the boxing match, that comes straight out of the novel.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And from what I've seen, like early production design for the original Planet of the Apes, they did at least have in mind, they were originally sketching things out like that. I think maybe it was a budgetary thing. They realized it's a little difficult. The technology hadn't quite gotten there yet,
I'm assuming all or most of y'all have seen that famous test footage with Heston, with Edward G. Robinson playing Zaius.
Yeah.
And see,
I haven't seen that.
They're wearing regular clothes in that one.
Yeah.
Is it on the DVD? Because I have the DVD, but I haven't watched any bonuses on it.
It's on the Beyond the Planet of the Apes documentary. I don't know if it's extra or anything else. Yeah, so that Planet of the Apes is a great example. One day we'll talk about that. We are going to talk about one big property today that Justin's going to talk about here in a second. And then we're kind of going to gradually scale down and go across the spectrum. Hello, we have another guest host. Who's this?
Who's this creature? Bill, your co-host.
Which one is this? This is Katie, One-Eyed Katie.
Hey, Katie.
Oh,
my boy tried to get in here and he was like pulling wires, and I was like, dude, you can't do this.
Oh, they're terrible.
Unless he has the high evolutionaries, intellect boost.
Yeah.
Help me with it. Rocket Raccoon. So I'm going to do mine last. We've each picked like a property, a movie, and then, we're going to talk about the novel or whatever the core text thing came from, a comic book, a novel, an old TV series, whatever. and how does it fare? Is it a good adaptation? Is it a shitty adaptation? Does it matter? How is the property itself? Has it been adapted other times, before or after the prime text that we're talking about? Usually after, but in Justin's case, there's the case where it was done before the one he's going to talk about. So, Justin, tell us what you chose, what film you chose, and why, if you want, and of course where it comes from and all that stuff. And
Yeah, sure. Okay, so the one I was going to talk about was the Lord of the Rings adaptation. Peter Jackson, New Zealand director. I know quite well. I don't know personally, but I know of for many years, been from there as well. But so it was a bit of a source of pride for the country that New Zealand was the setting for the Lord of the Rings adaptation. But it was at the cinemas sort of around the 2002 to 2005 period. 3 films, obviously a trilogy along, as per the trilogy and the novels. I've known the novels, the 3 books, since I was 14, 15 years, 16 years old. So so I was well familiar with the books, love the books. And what I think the beauty of the books is that you can visualize when they're going on a journey, the Fellowship are going on a journey, you tend to visualize the environment that they're walking in, so to speak. And I think the film was quite good at the visualization of the film was very close to what I visualized when I was reading the books 15 years previous. There were some parts of the books that I would have liked to have seen in the movies, but I realized that the film has to be edited down because they were still, each of them, about 3 hours long. And in fact, the final film, Return of the King, was probably more like 3 hours 25 or something like that.
yeah,
And if I had any criticisms, it would be that I think there were parts in the first book, Fellowship of the Ring, such as the Tom Bombadil, the Old Forest. I would have liked, I really enjoyed that part of the book, and I realized that I can see why Jackson thought that wasn't central to the main thrust of the plot, but I would have still liked to have seen maybe something like that in there if there was time. But I also feel that he got the pacing a little wrong in the second film, which was The Two Towers. I found that film was a bit dull and slow paced. It centered completely almost on the battle for Helm's Deep. And I think there was too much of a build up towards that battle at Helm's Deep, which was effectively the climax of the second film, The Two Towers. And if you read the book, in The Two Towers, Frodo and Sam have actually arrived at Shelob's lair towards the end of the second book, The Two Towers. And I was hoping to see that part in the movie when I was watching it. And I got a little bit frustrated when I could see that that was not the way that Jackson had paced the film. And then in fact, he was trying to put as much or save as much action as possible for the final film, which was The Return of the King. So yes, he did have limitations of time, but if he hadn't drawn out the Two Towers in the second half to the extent that he did, maybe some more parts of the book could have found their way into the movie.
I agree with you about that. The Two Towers.
Yeah.
But overall, I think it was a very faithful adaptation and gets top marks. And I think it did deserve quite a few Oscars, although strangely enough, all the Oscars seem to be left for the final film. Although I do agree that out of the 3 of them, possibly it's either the Return of the King or the Fellowship of the Ring are the best films out of the 3 of them. I can only speak briefly about.
Hey,
I'm a big fan of the
before you shift gears, let me ask you the tough question. So, as far as changes, because there were some big ones, and there were some that fandom at the time was, of course, angry about. And tell me about what you thought about what were the major changes in the Fellowship of the Ring, and were they good changes, really for the better, or you said they made sense to you, and that's totally obvious. But as far as just aesthetically, do you think there were any that were a big change that you would have rather not he done, or was a big change that maybe you thought was better than the book, or at least more elegant, more streamlined? Like the Arwen stuff, isn't she a pretty minor character in the book, but they wanted to kind of bring out a female character more besides just
Yeah. Well, they did bring out a female character more in the movie, such as Arwen, and also Eowyn from the people of Rohan, more than they were in the book. But I think that was fair enough. I think that's reasonable. As the books were written sort of 1940s and published in 1956, so yeah, it was a very male-centric novel, three novels, and I think it's fair enough that they did build up female characters more than they were in the movies. Sorry, in the novel. But I don't think they overdid it. Although I would suggest that I did find some of those scenes with, say, Aragorn and Arwen might have dragged a little bit for me anyway when I was watching the films. But I don't see that as a big criticism of the film. My only really, for me, you can't really go beyond the books to a large extent, although they are male centric. But I think that they're great novels. But as far as the films are concerned, my main concern was what I mentioned. I think was for the second movie. I think the pacing was a bit wrong in terms of what they put in and what.
So
And with the first movie was really good. I think they were pretty faithful in the first film. They spent enough time sort of developing the storyline in the Shire as the book does, as the novel does. I think it was strong with the ring race in terms of them basically hunting down Frodo and Sam as they were leaving Hobbiton. Hobbiton's a good place to visit, by the way, if you ever get to New Zealand. It's quite a good day trip. But there were parts in the Shire and possibly the Old Forest bit and Tom Bombadil. I thought maybe if they'd had time, could have been in the perhaps they could have put that in the first film and then less on the plains of Rohan in the second film. And somehow shuffled that around a bit.
So you would say it's more the structural things bridging the second one into the third changes weren't as good. So you were going to mention, we talked about.
I was going to mention the Ralph Bakshi film.
Yes, it's been adapted previously. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was first dimly aware as about 12 or 13 years old that there was this novel called Lord of the Rings, and that was about the time the Ralph Bakshi animated film came out. And by the way, you can still track that down on YouTube if you watch it.
I have it on DVD, yeah.
Back when I was about 13 in 1983, I think was when we in New Zealand got VCR players, and I remember one of the first films we got was the VCR cassette of Ralph Bakši's Lord of the Rings. But I remember being a little bit disappointed that it sort of finished halfway through, i.e. halfway through the I think it was halfway through. It wasn't even halfway through the Two Towers. I think it was the end of the Fellowship of the Ring. But what I did see, I really
grazed the Two Towers, but yeah, it didn't get far.
Yeah, what I saw, I really enjoyed, and I thought the animation. I still think the animation's pretty cool, actually. It created, for an animated film, I thought it created the atmosphere of the novel really well. So for its time, I think it was pretty good. I would have liked to see the second part, or third part, which covered the full trilogy.
Well, they ended up doing the third part on TV with the Rankin Bass, the same people who did the Hobbit TV. And you said you have not seen those two?
No,
I haven't.
I've seen it.
Okay, you guys have seen it. Yeah.
So yeah, so you do kind of get the second part, but it's it's completely different animation, completely different design, different pacing, everything. But it at least finished the story, and when we didn't have anything else, that's what we used.
Right, you would watch the Hobbit cartoon, the Bakshi movie, then the other.
But
anything else you want to share with us about it before we move to?
Well, I can briefly talk about The Hobbit with the three films of The Hobbit, but I didn't think they were as good as the Lord of the Rings trilogy by Jackson. But having said that, I still think they're reasonably decent, quite faithful to the Hobbit novel.
Don't you feel like... Go ahead.
I was just going to say they do have the benefit of better CGI because they're about 10 years after the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and there were some very humorous parts in it as well.
I like the fan edits of it that edit it down to 1-2 hour movie that is just focused on the Hobbit storyline. That
that's what I was talking about. Don't you feel like as adaptations though, the Hobbit they're kind of a mess. I mean, in my
yeah,
opinion,
well,
by this criteria we're talking about, just in my opinion, they fail as adaptations because he's really distorting the story and including all this other material to pad out 3 films. That's just
well,
how
I think people views can be coloured too because all the critics decided they had it in for Peter Jackson by the time he did The Hobbit for some reason. But there were some parts that didn't work, which were like a pinball machine, like when they're bowling over all the goblins inside the Mines of Moria on those ledges. I thought that was a bit over the top, and possibly with the barrels going down the stream too, escaping the elf fortress in the forest was a bit comical. But other parts worked quite well, like the comedic scene where the trolls are about to eat the hobbits over a campfire dinner sort of thing. That I thought that was quite funny with the trolls' accents and so forth. So I think out of the 3 of the films, like the first one, which was Unexpected Journey, was probably the best of the 3. The Battle of Five Armies was a bit, I guess, Hollywoodish in terms of concentrated on the battle, and I don't think it was that loyal to the book.
you feel like he wove in things from Silmarillion and other notebooks into that stuff to expand, or however you want to put it, the Hobbit story. Like
I think he probably did, and I've read the Silmarillion many years ago, but it's a hard slog, isn't it? But Jackson would know about. I think Jackson's a big Tolkien fan, so no doubt he's aware of all that mythology as well. Yeah, possibly. Yeah. There were some good cameos in it, like Stephen Fry was good as the mayor of Lake Town. I thought he was quite funny as a sort of dictatorial mayor, corrupt mayor. I thought he was quite good. Yeah, so it's pretty good, but I don't think as strong as the Lord of the Rings trilogy from 10 years previous.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna probably hit Bill next because he probably will be the next one to go earlier.
Yeah.
I haven't heard what you have picked out yet, so it's going to be a big surprise.
Oh, okay. Well, I've picked out what I would consider a good adaptation, though I think I'm in the minority there, and what I think is a terrible adaptation, and I don't think that there is a human on earth who would disagree with me on that one. So my good adaptation is Naked Lunch. And part of it is because as I'm watching this movie, I just can't help thinking, how did this get made? How did someone go to the producer and they're like, we want to make a movie out of Naked Lunch? And the producer, I mean, most producers in Hollywood are not what I would call educated or smart or intelligent. They'd be like, what's Naked Lunch about? It's an intriguing title. Like he's already imagining, the starlets he's going to casting couch on it. And he's like, well, it's a non-linear, nihilistic narrative without a very clear plot. But it's got a clear intent to evoke lots of disgust. And they're like, that doesn't really sound like a viable project. And they'd be like, oh, no. It's, for most people, it's barely readable. It's completely unfilmable. So what we're going to do is we're going to stick in a lot of events from the author's life. And I'm like, well, that sounds like a good solution. Is he a likable character? Oh, if you can't love a gravelly voiced pederast who killed his wife trying to shoot a shot glass off her head, who can you possibly love? And after this pitch, they gave $17 million to make this movie that people stayed away in droves when it came out. There was no chance. They even got William Burroughs to do like the trailer for it. And even he couldn't believe it. He's like, now, 39 years later, Hollywood in its infinite wisdom. I mean, you could just the contempt in his voice. But
we have to be fair here, though. It wasn't exactly a Hollywood movie. It was a Canadian movie.
No.
Jeremy Thomas is an international art house producer, so it's he went to.
I just didn't mind the pure balls that it took to make this.
Yeah, sure.
I just hope that they didn't like mortgage the house or anything, because there was zero chance it was ever going to make anywhere near 17 million, much less a profit. But it's not a movie I recommend to people. And I'm the idiot who brought Cannibal Holocaust to a let's watch a horror movie party. That went over well.
You brought a panel where I met you.
Yeah. but it's a hard sell for most audiences. But it's really about the writing process in a horrible allegorical. When I think back on it, much like the novel itself, it's hard to remember the storyline. It's just got a lot of interesting bits, but it's got what is probably one of my top 10 favorite scenes, where Peter Weller and Ian Holm are having a conversation, and at some point, Ian says to him, "Haven't you noticed that what I'm saying is not matching my lips?
Yeah, they're
It's
talking
all
on two levels.
it's telepathic."
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's absolutely brilliant.
It
That
was.
made me sit up and like, I don't think anyone's ever done something like before. It's so simple compared to the talking butthole insects and rapey centipede monsters and everything that are in this movie. Just that simple little effect was just, I've never gotten that out of my mind.
It was good.
Yeah. So there you go. I mean, the pure chutzpah to take something that's unfilmable, and by God, if anyone was going to do it, it'd be Cronenberg. But it didn't succeed in any normal sense of the word. Still, I just got to give him credit for trying. Now, okay, here's my bad one. I'm not a big Asimov fan. It's not that I dislike him for any particular reason. It's just that for whatever reason, when I read his fiction, it just kind of leaves me cold. Of the classic science fiction writers, I much prefer Ray Bradbury and Heinlein.
There's a lot to dislike about Asimov as a person.
Yeah,
in my opinion.
I learned that after, but I just did not warm up to his stuff even.
But I'm with you. Bradbury was more. Thing.
I recognize his place in the pantheon of great.
Yeah, especially the way that he treated women.
Oh God, no! Well, what's terrible about this? You go back, everyone's like, "Oh, it's so shocking! All the stuff that came out." It's like, listen, this was like a well-known joke. Like people used to make jokes about Harvey Weinstein at the Academy Awards. They used to make jokes about Isaac Asimov. Keep your girlfriend close. It's like, he's
Julius Schwartz, the comic book editor, supposedly.
Yeah, I was actually going to say the same thing.
Yeah, he hit on Colleen Doran.
Doran.
If you were a female and you were halfway attractive, Julie was after you.
You got to wonder how many great artists we all lost because they would go into the industry, see how they're going to be treated, and just say, you know what, nothing is worth this, and just leave. Some of the actresses who suddenly disappear. But
Bill, what's the work of Asimov's that you're
okay? The thing, a great story, Nightfall, an absolutely brilliant short story, which was Asimov's, I think, strength. The short story, simple premise, which is the best of short stories. A planet that has like 6 suns. Okay, this would not work, but go with me. 6 suns, so it's always daylight, and yet every 20,000 years, every couple thousand years, civilization is destroyed. They have a record. It's just, archaeologists have learned every 2,000 years, like clockwork. Can't be a coincidence. And this one guy has a theory that this is when all of the suns go into eclipse, and we have something that we never have: night. And perhaps we see far away suns, stars in the sky. Maybe up to a dozen or so. Who knows? Maybe I'm crazy here. And the whole thing, it goes on and on. And then at the very end, the suns blink out temporarily and it goes black, and they see the vastness of the universe. And it drives them all absolutely insane. The knowledge that they are not special snowflakes, that they are just one of virtually infinite numbers of stars and worlds and intelligences, and God did not smile down on them in particular. It drives them all mad. They destroy civilization, and then we begin the whole process over again. Absolutely fantastic story, which I've now spoiled for anyone who didn't read it.
I've never even heard of it that I'm aware of. And
I probably should have said spoiler alert.
It better be as good as your description.
Yeah, I've heard of it. I've heard the movie's not very good, but I had a professor who wanted to show it to us, and
but the short story is like 90 years old or something. You can't spoil that.
I guess that's true. And it was voted one of the greatest short science.
Yeah, it's an amazing short story. You are correct.
So they decide to make it into a movie.
When did this movie come out?
Oh God. Okay. Well,
90s, and maybe 89.
1988, and then 2 years later they did it again because they learned nothing from the fact that this is a terrible story to
Once you
adapt.
start remaking, you just,
Yeah. What makes it a good short story makes it a lousy long story.
Mm.
Even Asimov didn't figure that out because apparently he and another writer did collaborate and expanded it into a novel just to grab some money, I guess. But listen, some things this happens too on YouTube where someone makes a terrific short horror film.
Yeah.
And then they sell it to Hollywood, and I'm glad for that because they get some money out of it. And then they try to expand this simple, very simple idea. It's like taking a Bazooka Joe bubblegum and story and trying to make something big out of it. No, just stop.
can I ask you guys a quick controversial question? Because I'm sure most of you are happy you've seen this movie. Because it's exactly what you're talking about from last year. Skinamarink? Have you seen
Skinamarink, yeah,
the
I've seen
short
it.
one and the
Yeah, I've
long
seen it.
one? Do you think the long one was good? Do you think it was better, worse?
I didn't see the short.
I didn't like it,
I hadn't
Uh,
heard of it
both of
until you mentioned it. So
but I couldn't look away. So it's there's an argument to be made that maybe it's better than I thought it was,
There's a lot of texture to it.
since I wanted to, because by the end, I on that one, I feel like it was just reflective of how a child feels inside. So
Right.
none of it's reality. It's entirely the feeling that you have when you're, say, 3 or 4, and
Which
things
may
going
or may
around
not-
you that you don't understand anything that's going on around you yet. You haven't got a point of reference yet to comprehend what's happening around you. So in that sense, I think it's better, maybe.
Did you see it, Bill?
But I didn't like it.
I did not.
Okay,
Did you
so
like it?
has anyone here seen the short or the original version that he has on his own channel? Nobody? Okay. So
No.
he started the stuff on his own channel doing what you're describing, Bill. And that one got a lot of attention. And so he did expand it. Not to make a killing because it's just really, but he ended up kind of making a killing because it didn't cost much. And I've seen both, and as far as I think the longer one's better because I think even though it's more trying your patience, he also ironed out some of the more kind of cliche things he could have done with the story and leaves them kind of like, what the fuck does that mean? And maybe that's for the better because that's what Keith is hitting on. It keeps that. But
Right.
anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead about Nightfall.
I've got nothing against artists making money, and there's no money in shorts. So
Right, yeah.
a real skill is to be able to create a short that both functions as a proof of concept for a larger story, but also succeeds as a story in and of itself.
Majete.
When you're doing film festivals, when you're running film festivals like I do for Con Carolinas, you get an awful lot of these proof of concept short things, and they're the most irritating thing possible because they're well done and there's no story. It slaps you in the middle of a big story and it ends with no conclusion, and you're like, this is very frustrating. Short stories are not defective novels; they are their own.
But can you experience short cinema as just cinema? Like
Oh, I
experimental?
love shorts. I love short cinema. 'cause
And
I
I
can watch
mean,
a
not
whole bunch of them.
narrative. I'm talking about like Kenneth Anger, though his is arguably narrative.
Yeah.
He just does Stan Brakhage, you like that kind of stuff? Where it's
Um,
more a
Maya-
visual.
who's the woman? Maya Deren's
Maya Deren, that's a great
yeah,
example.
Meshes in the Afternoon. Oh, wonderful stuff. And
Okay.
I wouldn't want to watch. Tell you the truth, I would not want to watch a full feature of inauguration of the Pleasure Dome or something.
We
I think
don't
that
really
it's already
do
40
it. We
minutes.
don't really do anymore
Yeah.
like we used to, where you would get films that were made up of 3 or 4 short films that they weave together, and that might be where Nightfall could succeed, is if they did
sure.
if they had like 3 or 4 let's say you
Omnibus.
adapted Nightfall,
yeah,
9 Billion Names of God by Arthur C.
That
Clarke,
was
other
enough.
things that are
that was great.
other things that are thematically similar and wove them together into a movie of multiple stories,
Like
then you
anthology.
might be able to get some fantastic films with the budget of a film versus TV budget, that kind of thing.
It just frustrates me
Yeah.
when there's so many great novels that have never been adapted, like Childhood's End, or adapted well.
Like all of Philip Jose Farmer.
Yeah, Childhood's End.
Oh,
yeah,
all of that.
all of Farmer.
And
Except
they're like,
Riverworld. Enough said.
you know,
So what did you
Skip
liked the
Nightfall.
first version and disliked? No, you
Oh,
like
no,
you
Nightfall.
dislike both versions.
Oh,
So
they're
who did
terrible.
the film? Who was
Yeah,
the
I believe it
director
was
or
Roger
whatever?
Roger Corman, I think, was behind
Oh boy.
The producer. Okay.
Yeah, and he was
And-
producer, not director, so you
Okay.
He got
can't.
his hands on everything, man.
they did both of them on the cheap, and it low budget works for horror. Low budget almost never works for fantasy, and
Yeah.
it only works for science fiction if it's like dystopian, A Boy and His Dog, post-apocalyptic, which is basically
You
a
have
horror
to be
film.
minimalist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Idaho Transfer is one of my favorite science fiction movies.
I
Oh,
love
wow.
Idaho
You're the only-
Transfer.
It's
You're the
super
first
cheap.
people I've ever heard or even knew about that movie.
It's one of my favorite.
That's a
movies.
great film.
And Boy and His
Hard to
Dog, I
find.
recently got on Blu-ray, reviewed it on the channel. Yeah,
Yeah.
those are good. It's really, to me, it's just your ingenuity, and as long as you don't have to show like a ton of, Star Wars, Galactica, like long sweep, build 5,000 miniatures and you just, and hire big actors. But if it's something conceptual, another science fiction movie, it is a science fiction movie that most people would not think of it at first, is Liquid Sky.
Oh yeah.
It's very low budget, but to me, it's a great science fiction movie because
Well, yeah.
it's not just about a UFO coming to Earth. It's this whole scene and like all these layers and some William Burroughsian kind of things in there.
Well, Liquid Sky worked partly because it was a punk rock movie. And punk
Yes.
rock needs to be low budget. If it's high budget, it becomes Times Square.
Exactly.
There's
Larry
exceptions to
Cohen
every
is
rule.
good at science fiction.
Larry Cohen.
God
has some stuff.
told me to.
I feel bad about because my favorite writer is Harlan Ellison, and
Mhm.
he mostly, almost entirely, was short stories and a few novellas. But it's hard to imagine many of my favorite stories of his being expanded and still being good.
If you get a chance, you should check on YouTube. If you don't have the Blu-ray, there is an extra on the Blu-ray. You can watch on YouTube. It is close to the death of whoever of those two guys died first, L.Q. Jones, Harlan Ellison, and it's them talking in depth.
Oh, I've seen it. It's great.
Oh my God, it's so incredible. It's like so
It's-
touching.
it's
And
so
Harlan's like forgiven him, and he loves him, but he's still annoyed. And then
He's still annoyed,
LQ
and
is like,
LQ doesn't care.
LQ
that's the
doesn't
amazing thing.
care.
With LQ Jones, Harlan Ellison finally met someone who could put out as much shit and didn't, respected him,
He's so
but
elegant.
didn't care that Harlan was mad at him because
He's like,
Harlan's mad at everybody.
Harlan, I love you anyway, brother.
And I have to say, I'll do a whole thing on A Boy and His Dog, but LQ was correct that the audiences were so freaking stupid that they couldn't figure out the ending without getting explicit about it. Without, Harlan wanted to do it very subtly, the way it is in the novel. It's not clear what happens to old Wanda June.
Pretty
They
clear in
tried
the
that.
movie.
And, in the movie, it's very clear what happened to him, and it had to be because otherwise, even with the ending as it is, when I went to see it, there were people in the audience who were like, "So, where's the girl? What happened to her?" It's like,
Yeah,
what are you insane?
that's a tough one to watch with people.
I thought it was obvious what happened to her.
I
It
thought
was
so.
Very
I mean-
disturbing.
The first time I watched Performance with a buddy, I had to rewind and explain the last 2 minutes like 5 times to him. He's like, "No, it went too fast." I'm like, "They traded identities." Say what? No, huh? And I'm like, "Buy it. You frame it yourself." So Nightfall. So that great
Yeah,
concept
skip it.
we just did it.
Please, just skip it. Just
Skip
no.
it. Okay, so who wants to talk next? We're going to throw between Shelley and Keith. Andrew,
Just before you do, I have to go at
All
pretty
right.
much
Okay.
nowish for another
Okay.
appointment, but thanks a lot. I've really enjoyed the chat, and I'll see you all next time.
we've enjoyed.
All right,
Well, you
Yeah.
didn't.
Bye,
You didn't
Justin.
really tell us what they did with Nightfall that was so bad.
Well, hold
See you
on.
guys.
Have a good night, Justin.
Bye, Justin.
Bye,
I'll just-
Justin.
Good morning.
Bye,
guys.
Justin.
Good morning.
He's trying to forget,
Bye.
Scott.
The whole movie is the whole story is a punchline, and if you know the punchline ahead of time, but you're just waiting for it to get to it, and if you don't know it, it's just a long slog to get to this. No, just it doesn't work. It's like if a comedian told you a joke, a real fast, zippy one-liner, and then he's like, "Wait, let me tell it again," and this time dragged it out for 10 minutes.
That
The
sounds like a
punchline
Norm
is the same.
McDonald bit.
Oh, well, you know what? See, when Norm does it, it's freaking hysterical. You know,
Good
you're
example.
right. You're right.
Okay,
there.
I'm gonna tell you the joke again.
Yeah.
But this time it's gonna be even longer.
I think that was well done, Bill.
Oh, thanks.
Shelley, do you feel comfortable with your movie? I know you love it and the book. And it's a book that I haven't read, so you're already one up on me.
Do I feel comfortable?
Of course you.
Yeah, well, I chose this because I had just very recently read it. So, I mean, it's a little easier to come to mind, you know.
Mhm.
So anyway, my pick was Annihilation.
Oh, good movie.
By Jeff
Yeah.
Vandermeer. But yeah,
Was
the
it
movie
really?
by Alex Garland.
So, and actually the author liked the movie. I think actually, Henry, you have a little more info on that than I do, but
Well, Vandermeer said, people were talking about the ending and people either loved or hated the ending of the movie. And Vandermeer's like, I got to admit, their ending was way better than anything I could ever do, which I agree. But what little I know about Vandermeer, I don't see him thinking in that way visually the way they took it. That's just me. But Shelley, you could go into how it translated better since you've read the book.
there were a lot of differences between the book and the movie, but yet the concepts were kind of the same. I mean, like in the book, nobody had names. They were only known as the psychologist, the geologist, whoever. So they didn't have any names. There had been many groups of people who had gone in.
Oh, not just one.
Yeah. And at one point, Natalie Portman's character finds in the lighthouse this huge room just full of journals of everyone that had been there in the book.
That would work in a book.
So that was kind of cool. In the book, it was Area X. It wasn't the Shimmer.
That's the name of the trilogy, right? Sort of, isn't it? Like the Southern something trilogy / Area X. There's
Yeah.
3 of them. Is that the middle book? Is that the
What?
middle? Is that the middle book of the trilogy?
Oh, Annihilation? No,
Mhm.
it's the first one.
The first one?
Yeah. Yep.
So Ventress is the psychologist, right? Jennifer
Yes.
Jason Leigh. So
Yes.
they named all the characters. Were the characters female in the book, or different genders, or?
Yes, but is there 5 in the movie? I think
Mhm.
there's 4 in the book.
Well, at first they're 5.
Well, also between the book and the movie, nobody dies the same. I mean, all the deaths in the book are different than the than the ones in the.
Jennifer Jason Leigh's death in the movie is some transcendent shit, man. I saw it twice in the theater and I was like, oh my God, the light is pouring out of orifices and it just looks, I don't know.
That was really cool. Her death in the book is not that cool.
What about the monster? Is there a monster in there that attacks them that's a polygon of the different species like that the world creates, or is that something like that bear with the skull thing?
They didn't have the bear in the book, but they did have there was one part where there was a monster. They kept hearing this thing in the middle of the night that would just be like this moaning, groaning.
Okay. And was it fused with one of their friends like in the movie though? Was that what was moaning?
It was a past. It was someone who had been there in the past.
Oh, okay.
And morphed into this, thing. Natalie Portman's character in the book is not very social at all. She keeps to herself as much as she can. She doesn't really care about whatever other people are doing.
Was her husband on an expedition, or was that just something they added for pathos?
In the book, he's dead. He's not in a coma.
But he was at in a previous expedition.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So that's still a driving.
And she found his journal and read his journal and all that. There was no affair in the book. That was something that was added.
Yeah, that was I'm kind of awkward. I think I know why they did it, but I don't know. I feel differently about it every time I see it. I'm not like it's I don't know if it's like just supposed to be awkward, like to have that in there, like to show she really did love her husband even though she did this. And it's
Well,
like, okay, well, right, but
they had problems in the marriage, but the problems in the book were that they had completely different personalities. She was very introverted and he was not. And I don't know how they could have shown that in the movie.
he's
You know?
somewhat introverted in the movie.
Yeah.
She's very guarded. But is she also a scientist who was a soldier? In the book?
There was, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
What else? Oh, the lighthouse and the tower or the tunnel.
Okay. Yeah, tell me about it.
In the movie, I can't even remember. When she goes into the hole in the wall in
Mm-hmm.
the lighthouse,
Mm-hmm.
in the book, everybody in the group calls it a tunnel, except for her, she calls it a tower. She said to her, it's a tower. So it's kind of weird. But there's in the book, there is a creature down there, and it's writing all this almost like biblical verse stuff all the way down the tunnel.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, and I can't remember what they called the crawler or something like that. That had been a person that was kind of central to one of the later books,
But they don't show a duplicate of her husband in there, right? Or his corpse. Is that correct? Or do they?
they do have duplicates of people, like people show up back in the world, but they end up dying of diseases.
So how is the ending? Do you feel like does she come back? And if so, is she her or is she the duplicate?
She hard to explain. She has a duplicate, yes, and then she's also in
The area?
she's also in Area X.
But does the duplicate come back to outside of Area X?
Yes.
And does everyone know it's a duplicate? Does she know she's a duplicate? That's kind of in the movie. You're not even sure she knows she's a duplicate.
Well, in the book, they don't even say really how the shimmer was created. Like at the beginning of the movie, you see this, meteorite come down.
Yeah.
And that is not in the book.
Let
So
me
they
ask you.
tell you what happened.
Let me ask you a quick question, because this kind of weaves in with adaptations and remakes and stuff. Are you familiar with the fact that the book and especially the movie are very, very strongly patterned after the novel Roadside Picnic by the Karsky brothers or whatever, these Russian writers, and they made a film called Stalker? I know you know Stalker. I don't know if you've seen it, but
Okay, I haven't seen it.
when I went to the theater, I was like, wow, they remade Stalker with women. But then it kind of had its own thing too. But
Yeah.
because in Stalker they go into the zone, and it's a different kind of phenomena, but it is a phenomena. And Tarkovsky is a very languid director. I love it. I mean, Stalker to me is one of the great science fiction films of all time. That's just my opinion. So
Yeah, I really
give him. Well, Solaris is more popular even, and I liked Solaris. There's been 3 versions of Solaris. They shot one in Russia in the late 60s in black and white. It's pretty good. And then Tarkovsky's is amazing. And Actually, the one with George Clooney was way better than it had any right to be. So again, you've got these different iterations, but Stalker's only been filmed once. But really, Annihilation, it wasn't just me. It was compared a bit to Stalker, but I definitely think it has its own character. You know, the basic similarity, a lot of it is cinematic because, you know, except Tarkovsky moves at the speed of a snail. So they're like walking through this field, you know, great hands, very slow, great music, real electronic. And they're walking through the zone and they're kind of bickering once in a while. And then Annihilation, they're walking a little faster and there's some weird warpage going on. They're kind of bickering too. So to me, they're a nice mirror of those. So your verdict is: do you think the book is better? Does it matter? Are they equally good in their own way?
I like them both. I think equally. They're just they deliver the same kind of message, just kind of differently, you know. As far as whatever this is that's changing the DNA of everything, and she knows in the book that she's changing. You know, she feels it. She inhaled, or she smelled a flower or something. She saw it release some spores and she inhaled it, and then she could tell through the rest of the book that she was changing.
Wow.
So that was kind of cool. But yeah, I really like them both equally.
That's good. Good.
So
yeah, if anybody hasn't seen Annihilation here, I recommend it. And obviously Shelley does. Heath, what do you think, man? What you were going to pick a very interesting choice.
I got to take off, but you all
All right,
take care.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye, Bill.
Sure.
Bye, Bill.
Bye.
Well, springboarding off of what Bill had said, let me just do a real brief thing recommendation for anybody who hasn't seen it yet. That's
Okay.
also another adaptation.
Mhm.
Back in the mid 80s when they tried to relaunch the Twilight Zone. Did all of y'all ever check that out at all?
Yeah, I saw most of it.
Okay,
Yeah, I saw a lot of those.
did you see Paladin of the Lost Hour? It's Danny Kaye's in it.
No,
plays
isn't
an old
that
man.
an Ellison story?
And that was based on a Harlan Ellison story. And that's what I was curious if you.
I don't think I've seen it. I
Okay.
don't.
Well, I recommend it. I think it's on YouTube, if I remember right. Most of those episodes are on YouTube, the different stories. But Paladin of the Lost Hour, it's a great little short story by Harlan Ellison
Wait,
that's about an old man who's he's the Paladin of the Lost Hour in a cemetery who meets up with a younger man in his 30s who's going through some struggles. And it's just a real, it could be a two-man play, you know. I mean, it's really an emotional thing, like a lot of Harlan's
is it
work,
only
you know.
in the 80s show? It wasn't in the.
It's only in the 80s show.
Okay.
Yeah. And what's unique about it is if you read the short story, there's an introductory section at the very beginning. The introduction introduces the older man, who is the Paladin, and then it just briefly introduces the younger man, who it identifies as being almost 35. And then the last words of that first section are, one of these men was black, the other was white. And then it goes from there. So the reader is gonna decide who's white, who's black, and it gives a unique depth to it, right? I mean,
Yeah.
every one of us is going to read that differently, unless you've watched the adaptation where they took the position of who was white and who was black
Who was black
for
and
purposes of
who was
filming.
black and who was white?
Yeah, and so Danny Kaye is the Paladin. He's the white guy, so he's an older white guy, and then the younger guy who's struggling with his, Vietnam PTSD and stuff.
Danny Kaye is the Paladin.
Yeah, he's the older guy. Yeah, and the younger guy was an actor named Glenn Turman, a black man.
Oh my God, I love him.
Oh.
Yeah, you would know him from The Wire. He
I know
played
him from a lot.
yeah,
He's
a lot
genius.
of stuff.
He was Mr. Hanson in Gremlins.
Anyway,
JD's Revenge, Centennial. You could
he
go on. I love
he
that
gives such an emotional performance in that. It's really worth watching. It's a solid
I've gotta see it.
solid thing, and it's a really cool story. I mean, I recommend it. So check it out, Paladin of the Lost Hour. But that, just Bill had mentioned Harlan Ellison. Immediately I thought, oh yeah, there's that adaptation, which a lot of people
Okay.
haven't seen, because that show came and went, But
It
okay,
has kind of a following on DVD, I noticed.
yeah. So my movie is Watchmen, Zack Snyder's Watchmen, not the HBO Watchmen, Zack Snyder's Watchmen. I'm assuming everyone here has read graphic novel. Everyone's seen the movie, right?
I've read the graphic novel. I haven't
Haven't
seen the movie.
What about you, Shelley?
I have seen the movie. I have not read the graphic novel.
Okay, that's an interesting place to be. I'm sure Henry has
I got
done both.
both.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I've seen
Okay,
every
so
version
we
of the movie
got
and
both
every
sides of it. Okay. This is the I'm gonna have a real hot take on it here because
Right.
it's both an excellent adaptation and a horrible adaptation at the same time. So I recommend, if you haven't seen it, go ahead and watch it,
Mhm.
because of that. But here, where it's an excellent adaptation, is where Zack Snyder has his strongest skills, I guess you could call it, and that is visually representing the graphic novel. Basically, you can tell he is using the graphic novel itself as almost a storyboard reference for setting up scenes and visuals and all of that. And so watching that translation from print to the screen is very, very good. Okay. And the movie itself, I think, works as a movie on its own.
Okay.
Okay. It's basically consistent within itself. The performances are really good. I think, I could nitpick some directorial choices, in terms of scenes that go on too long and stuff like that. Some musical choices and things, other weird things you hear people talk about. But
Some of the
overall,
bullet time effects
yeah,
are a little
I mean,
much.
all of these, but these are all just, those are directorial flourishes, right? It's part
Right.
of what makes it obviously a Zack Snyder movie.
Yeah.
As a Zack Snyder movie, it's maybe his best one
Yeah, I
for
think it's
me. Okay. But as an adaptation of The Watchmen, it's also horribly off the rails because Zack Snyder is not a deep thinker. He thinks he's a deep thinker, but he's not. And he completely missed every bit of the themes that are just in The Watchmen. So it's like, it's this weird little Frankenstein monster. It's a beautiful work of fiction that works by itself, but because it's an adaptation, it's frustrating if you know the source material, because you're going, what the hell, man? I'll tell you, the first indication that it's off the rails on that is when they refer to themselves as the Watchmen. They call them, like it's a group, like this is our group, the Watchmen, and that was intentional throughout the book, that is not their name. This is a pejorative that has been assigned to them by the people because they see them as fascists. Right.
Well, there was only one superhero group ever.
Right. It was the Minutemen, and that wasn't even. They weren't even super. They had no supers. They were just crime fighters.
Watchmen is like, it's more of a.
It's a pejorative. It's what people are. The people call them that.
Snyder wanted them to be like a legacy super group, like Justice Society.
Right. Because he missed the point. He missed the point. Like, that's what I'm saying. It's like the entire movie you're you're missing the point, man. You're missing the point. But that's also I'll get off on that in a minute. But but the biggest thing, because the biggest change, Shelley, you have not read the graphic novel, right? Okay. No. The biggest change in it was the entire point of what was happening in the movie, which means the entire ending got dramatically changed. Oddly, it works for the movie on its own, but it simplifies it. but it simplifies it, but it completely changes it at the same time, missing the entire point of Watchmen. I'm going to spoil Watchmen, the graphic novel. The point is, we can't stop fighting. We're human beings, and our countries can't stop fighting. We have the only way that we can stop and come together, potentially, theoretically, is an external threat
What
to
Reagan
our
said in the 80s.
existence.
Yeah.
What
Yeah,
Zack
it's kind of the
Snyder
premise
does-
of Independence Day.
Yes, I mean, it's a simple premise that we kind of get because humanity sucks, right? We always go after each other, but at times an external threat comes and suddenly all of those things drop away and we work
Right.
together, right? I mean, that's the theme. We see it a lot.
Well, Alan
Zack
Moore was
Snyder,
directly quoting Ronald Reagan.
yeah,
I
and
remember
Zack,
when Ronald Reagan said that.
right, and so Zack Snyder makes the threat Dr. Manhattan, America's Superman.
The world's only superpowered hero.
So America becomes the threat. America's Superman is the threat. It's a threat from America. It's not the external threat. And Zach doesn't realize that.
Do you think he realizes he's propping up
No.
imperialism rather than poking holes?
No, he's just not that
Doesn't
bright.
realize
Not that smart. He doesn't realize it. He just thinks there's got to be the monster, but we can make Dr. Manhattan because that'll be cool and all of that. That's as deep as he gets.
And that's also his way of cutting out more of the subplots. That didn't
Right,
make
and then he doesn't have to deal with the subplot, right? And so he does this, which cleans the narrative up, but changes the entire point of the movie. Because now, is the world going to really rally around and come together because America's Superman just blew up New York City? I don't think so. I don't know how that would work. So he had to, it happens only because he says it happens.
They're exiling him. They're exiling him to Mars rather than he choosing to exile himself to Mars.
Essentially,
Because
yeah.
how's he going to come back?
Right.
Blame him, and when it's really Veep duplicating his power.
And there's no way the other countries in this world would ever look at America and think, yeah, let's trust America again.
Not in the 1980s he's portraying, or the one we lived.
No way. And so, so he misses so many of these things because,
Beautiful.
he hits the points, like he misses the fact that the RR at the end of the graphic novel is supposed to refer to Robert Redford, not Ronald Reagan. So he misses that joke.
Yeah, it's Robert Redford.
Right, it's Robert Redford, but he makes it Ronald Reagan. He misses the point once again. So that's the thing. It's like, so it's a frustrating thing. Because,
can I mention a couple of things real quick?
Sure.
And also to ask you something that you'll be able to tie in, I'm pretty sure, is with what we're talking about, our theme. I personally felt that because Rorschach was the most popular character, and I'm going to be honest, he's my favorite one. Maybe I'm a weirdo, but his origin was shortchanged a little. Whereas to me, his origin coming at number 8 was like the locust point of the series. It grinds to a halt, it gets you inside this guy's head and makes you think about what he's doing. Maybe he's not crazy, because then the psychiatrist is like, the world is fucked up. They eliminated his effect on the psychiatrist. They made the psychiatrist into this kind of callous guy who, like Zack Snyder, didn't get it.
Once again.
But when Rorschach dies at the end, I thought it was as powerful as in the comic.
Okay, and this is where the movie works. There's these emotional touch points.
Because the truth, he wanted the truth over everything.
When Rorschach, that whole sequence with Rorschach at the end, it's an amazingly powerful moment. It captured all of that.
And I even liked him taking off his mask. When I usually don't like when they change that.
The sequence, one of my favorite cinematic sequences of all time is in Watchmen. And it's the encounter between Dr. Manhattan and Silk Spectre on Mars, where he talks to her about miracles, which is in the book, but
Mhm.
it's not near as powerful in the book as it is when it's performed and expanded. When he is talking to her, every time I see that, I got goosebumps. It's just like a powerful moment of giving her a sense of value that she
And she's not that
never
great an
had.
actress, but
No,
Crudup is a great actress, and I know
yeah,
it was
yeah.
just motion capture, but his
Oh no,
voice is
what he
very
did, yes,
subtle.
what he did with that performance, like I said, that's one of my favorite scenes of all time in cinema. I share it repeatedly with people because it's just one of the most moving things I've ever seen, and
Yeah, it's good.
it's better than the book.
Yeah, in a
And
way,
so
it's
this is
not as it's not as sentimental as the book. It's a little more compact. You know,
yeah,
it's a little less. I mean, in the book, it's good, but you're kind of like, she's a lost soul, and then of course the revelation that Eddie's her father and all that. But I wasn't engaged with her as a character per se. I should have. I guess I was supposed to be.
well,
Um,
there's a few more things like that he did that missed the point once again, and that is, like, for example, when Night Owl and Silk Spectre go on that they put on their suits again for the first time and go and they
mhm.
just beat up the bad guys. You know, suddenly they're leaping around like they got superpowers, and breaking bones and jumping and flipping and all this kind of stuff. That completely misses again the point of Watchmen. These
This
guys
would
are
have given
not.
Dan a heart attack in the
Yeah,
comic.
I know. It's missing the point. These are not superheroes. If they're gonna break somebody's arm, it's gonna be a struggle to break their arm. If they're gonna be fighting them in the alley like that, it's gonna be a struggle. They're not gonna be leaping through the air and doing flips and landing and all that kind of superhero-y stuff. They come out of that unscathed. They had to have superpowers, which misses the entire point. Nobody has powers in this world. They're all just
Rorschach was good because he
clones.
does close quarters contact, and he's fast and he's brutal. He'll break your arm.
Right. Yeah. He's a
But he'll
different
be
story.
messy.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a different story. But
Right.
yeah, so I mean, so the performances are really good. There's moments of cinematic brilliance to me.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and visually, I love it. And I can enjoy sitting down and watching it, but Zack Snyder does not understand what he's even putting on the screen. And this is unfortunately an ongoing problem with Zack Snyder, is that he thinks he's a deep
He
thinker and
started
he
it with Dawn
does
of the
not.
Dead. He didn't
You know?
get Dawn of the Dead, and he went from there.
Well, yeah, but the screenwriter did. That's where that adds to it. And
But he
even
had to change it though to his
and
own
that's
taste.
yep, and that's where Zach usually winds up undercutting his own work because
Right.
he doesn't understand what he's actually doing. It's like these movies that he makes, Watchmen is a good example of it, is better than it should be because he is really such a good visual stylist and he understands how that works.
And
And
his early effects work where he's doing a lot of experimental like camera techniques and photography, like in 300 to make it look like Frank Miller. And in Watchmen, obviously, I thought he really was on top of the technology, but by the time he got to Batman versus Superman, the CGI was getting really slack.
well, yeah, but that's not always the director.
No,
Sometimes
it's not.
sometimes it's
not.
the budget
But
and who
yeah.
the production company lets them use.
But his cut did look better, way better actually, to me. Did you think
Yeah.
so?
Which one?
His cut of JL, I thought looked a lot.
Oh yeah,
better.
yeah. I really do enjoy
And
his
flowed better.
4-hour long Justice League. Yeah, I think that works a lot better. So Watchmen, I recommend people to watch it, but know that if you've read the graphic novel, you're going to have some moments of frustration because it's a terrible adaptation
Well, quick follow-up.
thematically, but a great one visually.
How do you feel? I hope you've experienced this. Did you watch the HBO show?
HBO show is one of my favorite shows of all time.
So how do you feel about the fact that they went back and course corrected and it's a sequel to the comic book only?
Yeah, to me, it's a sequel to the comic books. It does the movie doesn't exist in that world.
How did you feel about it? Because most people just forgot about it or hated it.
No,
I liked it.
I loved it from first scene to the last. I own it on Blu-ray,
Oh,
and I've rewatched it on Blu-ray. Yeah, it's just, to me, that is the perfect bookend to Watchmen, or
Wow.
addition to
Good to
Watchmen
hear
to
that.
me. Yeah,
I
yeah,
did
yeah.
a review of it a while back, and man, even to this day, it's only at 8 views.
Oh wow. Yeah, no,
Everybody
that
gave
is
a fuck.
that is an example of capturing the themes correctly and then doing
Yes.
something fresh with it. So it's both an adaptation and a sequel at the same time. It's really cool that way.
I have a comment, if I could comment.
Sure, yeah, jump in.
My cousin saw it in IMAX theater and said that watching Dr. Manhattan was really depressing for him as a man.
Yeah, that's another thing. In the comic book, Dr. Manhattan has a normal sized dong, and in the movie, Zack Snyder decided to give him a porn star sized dong, and it is distracting on the big screen, not so much on the small screen.
He looks like a statue, which the statues were basically us men when we're absolutely utterly contracted.
Yeah, but yeah, exactly.
Not-
But in the
not in the
movie,
movie.
he's got that massive. You know what I'm saying? He's got the crank going.
We know why Lori likes him.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so yeah, it's
Very good.
it's a little distracting on big screen. I can imagine IMAX. I don't think I saw it on IMAX, but I can imagine that would be a little bit of distraction, especially when I have 3 of them at the same time going, a couple of
All
scenes.
making love to her. Jesus.
Yeah.
Gonna wreck that woman. So we're gonna go to Scott. He's got an ambitious little thing, but we're gonna let him cut loose for a while before I wrap things up with mine.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about L. Frank Baum's The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, and this is kind of a topic
book.
that it was going to be a dissertation topic, but I didn't get to go on and write a dissertation. But anyway, so L. Frank Baum writes this novel, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, in 1900. Well, actually, it was written before that. It's kind of like stories that he kind of cobbled together at the insistence of his mother-in-law, and he turned it into a novel. It's called The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, and it was a huge hit when it came out, and he immediately set out to adapt it for the stage. And I have a copy of that adaptation. It hasn't been officially published. And he stayed rather close to the book. He added a lot of songs. He did make it a musical. But when producers picked it up, they said, no, they literally wrote on it, not good. And they turned it into a stage play in 1902 in Chicago, and it came out on Broadway in 1903, and it was a smash hit, but it had almost nothing to do with the book that he wrote. And
Did he write the book for that one?
What was that?
The book for that play, or just
He is credited with the book for the play, but it was mainly written by Glenn McDonough and somebody named Finnegan. Michael Patrick Hearn told me about Finnegan in 2012, and I asked him if he'd ever even found out what Finnegan's first name was, and he said he had.
His last name was Mike.
Yeah, so Michael Patrick Hearn wrote the annotated Wizard of Oz, so he is like the expert. And like he hasn't even, and part of that's because he did a lot of interviewing with Matilda Jewell Gage, who was L. Frank Baum's niece, and so she had lots of stories. And
so, how did it evolve after that version of the play?
Well, after that version, Baum made one called Fairy Log and Radio Plays that is lost, which was it was a mixture of stage and film, and he used his own money. And it didn't do well because it did well, but it couldn't make back the cost because he was charging so little for people to see it. His goal was actually, since the books cost $1.25, that poor kids wouldn't be able to see it, so he was charging a dime to see this show, and he couldn't make back the cost, and he had to end up filing for bankruptcy, losing the rights to The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, The Magical Monarch of Mo, The Enchanted Island of You, Dot and Tot of Maryland, The Life and Adventures of Sam. He lost the rights to all those books. Everything was published by
the books, or rights to adapt them.
No, he lost the rights.
He was
every
shamed
book
then,
that
Mike.
every book that Bob Smurrow published, American Fairy Tales, also every one of those, he lost the rights to. They got sold to a company called M.A. Donahue, and they would actually promote his books. And they would say, "Why would you buy one of these sequels for $1.25 when you can buy the original for 75 cents?" So he really got screwed over. Then his son sold the rights in 1925 for a film to a comedian named Larry Seaman, and he made this thing with Oliver Hardy and this black actor credited as G. How Black, and there's some
It's got
argument
its whole. It's in Oz, but it's got like a whole other weird plot.
Yeah, a lot of it seems to be derived from The Scarecrow of Oz, which was in turn derived from his Baum's own film adaptation of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz called His Majesty the Scarecrow of Oz. So he did a whole thing. I won't get into it right now, but he made
that became a
number,
movie of its own.
Yes, he made
Which
a
is
number of silent
brilliant.
films
Everyone
in
should watch it.
1914 and 15. Yes, he made some excellent silent films in 1914 and 15. But again, those didn't do that well. He didn't invest his personal money in it that time.
Have you skipped over the 1910 or 1911?
Yes, I did skip over the 1910 film. So what happened is along with the bankruptcy element, he lost there was some contractual agreement with Otis Turner, who did the film sections for the Fairy Log and radio plays. And there were 4 short films: Wonderful Wizard of Oz, The Land of Oz, Dorothy and the Scarecrow and Oz, and John Doe and the Cherub, which for a long time, until the 1910 Wonderful Wizard of Oz was found, was assumed to be made from the Fairy Log and radio plays. And now we can tell that it absolutely was not. It doesn't match any of the photographs of Fairy Log and radio plays at all. So, and they jumbled things up. Michael Patrick Hearn did an article where he talked about the scenarios for the other films that we haven't found yet.
So did you think the 1910 or whatever 1911 was a decent adaptation, considering all the problems around it?
It's really interesting. It's a very strange adaptation, so I find it really hard to evaluate in that respect, because it's basically just a lot of scenes going on in Oz, and like Glinda pops out and turns Toto into a guy in a dog suit.
Okay.
It's some really
I think
strange
I've seen
stuff.
clips of that, or still photos or
It's
something.
on YouTube.
And the Wicked Witch of the West is called Mamba, and she has this lizard jumping around. It's really strange and
arbitrary changes.
Yeah, it's really bizarre, and some elements are taken from the play, like Nick Chopper playing the piccolo. There's a whole thing about Nicholas Piccolo in the play, and you see that in the movie.
And how many people actually know that his name is Nick Chopper? Only
anybody who's read the sequels.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, if you've read the sequels, you definitely know his name is Nick Chopper, because it does get used quite a bit.
Oh yeah. And I like the fact he chopped himself all the way down to his head.
Yeah.
The enchanted axe. He was like a cyborg. Somehow his head survived, but then that had a new voice.
Yeah.
And they don't make it clear if his brain's inside it or if it's just all magic. But somehow his consciousness is.
Yeah, his consciousness is in there, and
one
thing that a number of essayists has got wrong is that the Tin Woodman does state he does not have a brain. There is a discussion where he says, "I don't have a brain or a heart, but I only miss the heart."
Yeah,
he specifically says that in the book. And
but
then Glinda turns around and says that he does. So whatever.
what is the next adaptation of note, cinematic?
Well, of course, that would be the 1939 film. Well, there was the 33 cartoon, but that doesn't.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's the 25 one, which kind of bombed.
There's the 25 one. There's the 1933 film. There was a 1931 film of the second book, with the Meglin Kitties.
Okay.
But then the big one is the MGM film, and it's interesting because when back in November I saw Stephen Schwartz at a film on a panel with Michael Patrick Hearn and some other people, and he was talking about how when he did Wicked, he basically had to treat the movie as a documentary, and treat it as like absolute gospel truth, because he could use anything in the books that he wanted as long as it didn't contradict what was in that movie.
That's weird. Why was he hung up on
That
the-
was basically the reception he got from a lot of fans, because that it's a huge cult film.
Well, he's hung up on the movie version. That's his text, and
Yeah,
how many people feel that way anymore? At least people who do Oz pastiches.
yeah.
They usually go to the book. But
The thing with that film is
the
it's a
farmer
better
didn't-
adaptation than the 1925 film, and it does get a lot of the story into the film, but it makes a lot of changes. It really wrecks a lot of the feminist element. A lot of the spiritual theosophical ideas
Yeah, the
get
philosophical
thrown out.
stuff is thrown out the window.
And then when Joseph Campbell talks about story, he talks about the idea of the return. That whole bit is gone, because like there's a whole section in the novel where after the three characters know that they have what they've been looking for, because the wizard has put these fake things in them, they go out and they behave totally differently as they go on the journey to Glinda, because rather than Glinda coming to them, who Glinda has not, we've only heard about her at this point in the novel. The Good Witch of the North is a completely different character, who doesn't know she says there's some charm associated with the shoes, but she doesn't know what it is, and nobody really does know what it is, because the witch wasn't really observed using any sort of powers with the shoes. So she
They don't
doesn't
really
know.
go deep into the magic in that book, maybe because they don't have time to tell the story he's telling. But once you get
Yeah.
into the next books with like Glinda and Ozma and Mombi, that stuff's fascinating. I mean,
Yeah.
those were very.
And one of the things that's really
powerful
unique
women
about
characters.
Baum's magic that I thought didn't work when they brought it into Once Upon a Time, even though I think that's a brilliant TV series, was the whole black and white magic thing. Because for Baum, magic was a neutral tool. It depended entirely on the will of the user, whether it was good or evil.
I wouldn't have brought Oz into that show personally. I think they had the right fairy tales, but to me, Oz is like it's like that, but it's almost so
It's
such a big thing on its own.
It's so different. It didn't really fit, and a lot of it kind of I think a lot of it was inspired by Wicked. And like in the last season where Zelina runs the spin class and everything about the bike, and like if you're really focused on the book, it like took me a few seconds to think why the bike was so important to her, because none of that stuff at the beginning of the movie comes from the book. The book starts very quickly. It talks about how poor they are. The house has only 4 walls. She doesn't have her own room like she does in the movie. The cyclone cellar's in the middle of the floor. It's not external from the house, because in the movie she goes back into the house and she follows that stupid advice they used to give you to open the window to reduce the pressure, and she gets hit on the head, and that's when the dream sequence blatantly starts.
Right.
In the novel, she gets into the storm cellar. Toto jumps out and she has to go under the bed and get him. The house picks up with Toto while she's trying to save Toto. And she gets on the bed and she eventually falls asleep after the tornado calms down. So that's one of the things. Is the book is absolutely not a dream in any respect.
Right. No.
The number of times she goes to rest in that book, like the first night, the Munchkin scene in the movie is kind of a combination of two different
scenes. Don't forget the poppy field.
Yeah,
we can dissect that one too.
Yeah, that's an interesting one too, because that was actually created for the stage play, and that was they had the rights to every previous version. If you read the official 50th anniversary pictorial history of the Wizard of Oz, they go into detail about all the ideas they were trying to throw into this movie that didn't have anything to do with the book or anything. There's a whole subplot about the Wicked Witch of the West. What?
Poppy fields are in the book.
Yes,
I think they're referenced, but we don't get a sequence like that.
There is a whole sequence. There is a whole sequence in the book. It's just the solution is completely different.
The solution's different. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
And there's no violence.
It's been a long time since I've read the books.
Nick Chopper doesn't kill those wolves.
Yeah, in the
Didn't
book he
bother me.
does. In the
He
book he
doesn't. He
does.
kills the wolves in the book. He doesn't in the movie though.
That's correct. He does not in the movie. Yeah. So like I said, well, we don't have any of that stuff at the beginning. So there's none. I've been told that like the reason they decided to make the movie a dream is because Freud was really popular in the late 30s, and also because they were trying to make it instead of setting it at the turn of the century that was actually supposed to be 1930s Dust Bowl in the film. So
Yeah.
though they were in a lot of ways they were trying to make it topical.
Well, the contrast with the poverty, I think, is the black and white is kind of a cinematic. She's
Yeah.
in black and white and she's in kind of squalor. And then she's in color and she's in like a paradise.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like personally, the concurrent films that were based on the sequels that came out in the 1910s and 20s, well before the 39 one, I think they're superior to any of the other ones. Like, for instance, I think His Majesty the Scarecrow and Patchwork Girl of Oz, in my humble opinion, they're masterpieces. They're like,
I think they're excellent.
Of that period, they summed up Oz by adapting works that weren't, I mean, the kids bought them, obviously, but they weren't as iconic as the first book or even the second. And I wish they'd done, I don't think, there isn't a Land of Oz from that period, right? The closest thing we have to a Land
there is, but it doesn't exist anymore that we know of. It's been lost. There was one in 1910. Like I said, there was also one from 1931. And I've seen that was only a 2-reeler, and the second reel doesn't have any sound anymore. At least the one that I saw.
Well, the thing is and there's another one that was kind of a sort of tie-in that he made an Oz one. What's it called? It's got another
the Magic Cloak of Oz, which was based on
I
Queen
think that's
Zixi of Ix.
excellent too.
Yeah, it's good. It's kind of hard to judge it because a lot of it's missing, and they recently found a scene in an odd place where Aunt Rivette gets her wings. But that was never previously in available prints of the film before.
Don't they mush the origin of Kip turning into Ozma into the book, into the movie, His Scarecrow, Majesty the Scarecrow? Is that the right movie they put it in? One of the movies.
No, they didn't do that. None of them have Tip into Ozma except Fairy Log and Radio Plays, which doesn't exist anymore.
Tip is in one of the early movies.
Only Fairy Log and Radio Plays, and I think he's in the Lost Land of Ozma.
How was Ozma introduced in those movies, or is she just assumed to have always been there?
Ozma is already ruling Oz in both of those films.
Oh, right, because
the Patchwork Girl of Oz is straight from the film. Right. It's straight from the book.
It is.
She's already on the throne. She orders Ojo to be arrested. She's played by Jessie Mae Walsh.
And that's also why in the Scarecrow of Oz, he's already the king of the Emerald City.
Mm-hmm.
So
in His Majesty the Scarecrow, Ozma didn't appear in that one.
So he's the king of the Emerald City, but they don't mention Ozma.
Yeah. So and he only becomes king at the end.
A lot of people get confused about this stuff because, again, they're holding on to the movie, and they're kind of like the wizard was really a crook and a shyster, but for some reason, Baum had a soft spot for him and tried to redeem him, and I just never bought it. I mean, I didn't hate him, but I was like, "Come on, man! He kidnapped the crown prince."
Yeah,
he took.
I haven't read it, but Hugh Pendexter III wrote a story called Oz and the Three Witches. I think in the late '60s, where it basically explained that he didn't realize how bad Mombi was, and he thought he was protecting Ozma. And he couldn't have known, since he never left the city, he couldn't have known what Mombi was doing. So
right. This is pretty wild. So the only other, I think the best book movie that has the flavor of Return to Oz mixed with obviously a couple of slightly later books is Return to Oz. And
Yeah.
that's my
David
take.
Dykett did a really interesting essay in the 30th anniversary issue of the Bomb Bugle devoted to Return to Oz, where he compared it actually to French New Wave cinema and Walter Murch's influence in the French New Wave. That was a really interesting article.
It's a deeper movie than a lot of people give it credit for. I mean, especially if
Yeah.
you've read the books, you know.
Yeah.
It's
But
interesting.
there's like so much in the MGM movie that is totally not even parallel. Like the fact that Dorothy has to be rescued by her male friends, which is not in the book at all. She actually sends the Winkies out to rescue her friends after she's killed the witch.
Little Winkies. So I think you've done
And the Winger Monkeys are great characters. Like they like
Mhm.
terrified everybody, and they're not even really that bad. They're really just mischievous, and they're under this spell. So like we have to obey. They actually talk, like all the animals in Oz. They talk, and they say, "Well, we have to take you to the Wicked Witch of the West because we're under the spell of this cap, and but we can't actually hurt you because the Good Witch of the North has kissed your forehead." So and so Dorothy knows exactly what's going on, and she's not afraid of them because they're not out to hurt her. They know they're taking her to someone who might hurt her, but they themselves are not going to hurt her.
Shelly's going to bow out. She's going to miss my pick.
Oh,
Don't cry.
I'm sorry, but yeah, I have to go.
Okay.
Well, why don't you tell us what it is, Henry, real quick?
Lolita.
I figured.
Oh yeah, Lolita. There you go.
Sure you don't want to stay and hear it?
I'm sorry, I can't. It's gonna be an early morning.
All right. Well, peace to you. We will wrap up.
Bye.
So bye-bye.
Yeah, the Winged Monkeys are really great. He never used them after the first book, but they're really interesting characters who get an entire origin. You get an entire chapter-long origin story that we never get in the movie.
All right, so I'm gonna institute what Bill Mulligan said last meeting. You weren't there, Keith. Bill Mulligan said, "Henry, you've got to stop looking at this project as a democracy. It's not a democracy. It's a benign dictatorship. You were a very benign and kind person, but you're a dictator. If you've got who else is gonna do it?" And I was like, oh, I was actually like really touched that he said that. Because after having to butt heads with Marco this week, I was like, wow, okay, somebody's actually giving me credit for trying to hold everything together. It was really nice. Not that y'all haven't said nice things too. I'm saying it was the first time I'd heard him express that viewpoint.
Is Marco gone permanently or?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. We'll talk about that another time. As little as possible, if we could, say his name as little as possible on air, that would be. So Lolita. So 1955 Nawab Vladimir Nabokov. He's Russian, but he was fluent American, and fluent English. But he wrote Lolita in Russian and then translated himself. He'd done a ton of other great books, very deep and very florid language. I think he's one of the masters of the English language, and I guess by extension, maybe of the Russian literature language. But definitely a thinker and a feeler and a guy who's kind of into social satire and psychosexual kind of, uncomfortable things that people didn't really write novels about as much back then. And Lolita, of course, scandalized everybody, but it sold millions. And so within 7 years, there was a film by Stanley Kubrick. And, the tagline was, which I didn't use that poster here because I like this art better, but can you believe they made a movie of Lolita? And my mom told me how scandalous it was when I was a kid. And, I didn't know anything about any of this. But she was having worked in the movie theaters, a TV junkie. She was a star junkie, she was a stargazer. So she's like, Sue Leon is grown up now and her career's gone nowhere. She only have these little anecdotes everywhere. But she could never tell me much about Kubrick. The only thing I knew about Kubrick was that he made 2001. So he's one of the directors I knew by name in my entire life. My dad took me to see 2001 at that famous 1972 first reprisal. I was young. but I loved it. I had no clue what it meant, but it had permanent impact. Um, but anyway, Lolita, it took me, I'd say I first read the novel finally in like 1992, and I first saw the movie either late that year or early the next year. I took it over to a friend's house. We watched it, and it's pretty long, like Kubrick. And I was blown away. I mean, I didn't feel like it went against the vibe of the book. I thought it was a great adaptation without being graphic, without being, obviously he's not going to use all the linguistic kind of tricks and satirical elements. And he kind of shunted all those onto Quilty because obviously he loved Peter Sellers. Peter Sellers, of course, is another problematic. He was an absolute, pretty much a bastard in real life. And I've been asked by sociologists about him. They coined a psychological term, the right man syndrome. He always had to be right. A.E. Van Vogt wrote about him. Colin Wilson wrote about him. They're basically, he was a nut and very unpleasant, but very talented. And I think he was, pretty much into trying to get laid as much as possible and being on screen and hogging it as much as possible. He was a true ham. But some people didn't like there was so much Quilty in the movie. I think the fact that all those factors played into his performance, that's good. It makes him despicable. And then by default, you have more sympathy for Humbert despite his indiscretions. Because essentially, Humbert is a guy who is a reluctant, as in he's timid, gradually comes out of his timidity, predator of a girl who's 12. Quilty is a open predator of girls that age and makes child pornography, though they never use that term in the book.
Yeah, they call it art movie.
They do use a term similar to it in the Adrian Lyne version. They make it a little more explicit. There is something in the book that strongly hints at it, but they don't mention any of that in the Kubrick movie.
Yeah,
but,
one of the things with the book is that he tells you right at the front he's not going to use any, he's not going to say anything explicit, he's not going to put anything graphic in it, and that's very true. And I think that's one of the reasons the Kubrick film works.
Humbert to me he's the ultimate romantic. For a long time, when was it Vintage Press or that Vintage, was that the one?
Mine is from Vintage. My copy is Vintage.
That's the one I had. They had different covers, but I had the cover with the girl with the bicycle, and it said the only truly convincing love story of the 20th century. Susan Sontag, or it was a female philosopher said it, and which I thought was cool.
I have the one that has the girl's legs on it.
I used to have that copy too. I have one copy now, but I don't remember. It might be that one. To me, he's like the ultimate romantic. Now, of course, he's in his head, he's solipsistic,
Right.
But he doesn't really he shares what's in his head, but he doesn't really try to justify it. He makes fun of it. He's got intellect and a self-deprecating sense of humor, and simmering under that, he has this sexual passion. He's a pretty fucking three-dimensional character. I mean, and he's really one of my favorites. And when James Mason played him, though, I felt so sad for him. There's 2 points where I feel terrible, because early on, he's pretty manipulative, and admittedly, Charlotte is horrible, but, he really plays that really underhanded. Your mom died after she learned my predilection. But it's when they finally catch up with them and they take him and they try to put him in the mental hospital and they drag him onto the ground, and it's a black and white movie, and the contrast between the hospital with the white light out here and him on the ground, because he always wears, later on in the movie, he always wears all black, and he wears this long black trench coat, and they're pulling on him. He's like, no, and it's like, and then he gives up, and it's like, oh my God. mean, nobody's on his side. I mean, they don't even understand what's going on.
Right.
But that's the end of him and her. But then the next scene where you feel for him is when he finds her a couple of years later. And of course, that classic where he says, there are 10 steps between you and me in that car, you know so well. Take them with me right now. Forget everything. And she's like, I can't do that. And he's like, oh, well, you know, he says something like, it would have made all the difference. You know, he's resigned. And I think the movies bring the Quilty feud to life because it's the only real action in the movie. And so, you know, they start with it and they end with it. I think the 1997 starts with it also, if I'm correct. I did like Jeremy Irons a lot as Humbert. I just loved him. Dominic Swain was okay at Lolita, but you know, they don't really, Lolita doesn't have to be a great actor. Because part of the problem with the character is he's in love with this girl because her age and her looks and the sexual whatever. But let's be honest, he doesn't love her as a person. And really, there's really nothing to her as a person.
Yeah. In the book, he calls her a nymphet because that kind of dehumanizes her.
Well, yeah, and
sexual.
it pushes responsibility off of him.
Yeah.
Because as soon as you start saying nymphet, then oh well, she wants it. It's that perspective.
But that's where the book goes crazy, and where if you got deep into this with people nowadays, they would not be happy with this. Because you can tell me if you agree with this. Is you're right about the way Humbert treats her, but then you kind of find out she's been with Quilty all along. So Humbert is a guy who has been stalking a prepubescent girl. Lolita is a prepubescent girl who's been stalking a much older suave man. So they're the flip side. It's just, unfortunately for Humbert, he's not the suave man that she wants.
Right.
And the suave man that she wants hurts her. And I think that makes, though it barely registers with her really, because she really seems like kind of an amoral, oblivious character. Even at the age of 18, she's a little more composed. She doesn't act corny, but she's still very much like, it's all about me. Like, give me the money, you know, and it is painful, but true, you know, when she's like, I'm carrying another man's child. And I had a crush on a woman who's carrying another man's child. And it can be painful. I just had a crush. I wouldn't want to think about if I'd slept with her and madly in love with her. It's like, what are you going to do? You're going to, you know, kidnap her with another kid. He didn't care. He would have. And that's what you're like when you're in love to that way. I kind of have been to that love more than once that way, where I'm not thinking right away. And then later I go, okay, this is work. But I think he feels like now he has a vendetta to justify things. And that's why he writes him that thing. And he's like, you hurt Lolita because you did. He makes Claire Quilty write his own sins. And of course, Sellers hams that fuck up. And then he dies, you know, and I don't think you're aware of what is about to happen, Quilty. You were about to die. Think about it. And I think Langella was good in the sense that they didn't have many scenes of him in disguise like Quilty. It's a little more really mysterious, like who's in the car, you know. And when he catches them, I mean, he runs around the house with his robe and his, you know, dick's flopping around. Langella's a trooper. And you know, when he finally gets him again, it's like, okay, like James Mason, it's like this very stately sounding actor, Jeremy Irons, like, you're going to die, you know, and you're just like, yeah, plug the motherfucker. But he goes to jail and he doesn't resist it. He knows he's going to jail when he's on the way to kill him. And part of it, I think, is he's going to jail because, okay, I killed the guy, I avenged her, but I'm also kind of going to jail because I kind of used her too. I didn't mean to, but hey, I'm sharing some guilt. And then the fact they die like a day apart. And that's not portrayed in the Kubrick, but it is in the Adrian Lyne. I thought the Adrian Lyne movie did a good job in making it a period piece to the 40s and early 50s. I think the casting was good. Photography was good. And it was more sexually explicit which they barely got away with. You know, they couldn't release it theatrically, and then Showtime bought it. And when it came on Showtime, a whole bunch of my friends invited me to their house and we watched it together. And unfortunately, I wouldn't do this now, but I was like the geek in the room because I knew more about it than everybody. And I was like in the movie apart while we're watching it, and I was driving them mad. I was like, that's not what happened. You know, I like that better in the like, shut up, Henry. You know. And, you know, and then the end, after we'd all watched it, I felt like I'd been a dick, but I also felt like after talking to people I was with, they didn't really get the movie either. One of my friends kind of got it, but he had to throw in, yeah, but he's still a pervert. I'm like,
well, yeah, that goes without saying,
Yeah.
correct?
I
I
mean,
mean,
we get it. It's like saying, yeah, I mean, yeah, I get Charles Manson, but he's still a murderer. It's like, well, sort of. He's still a conspirator to murder.
right.
But anyway, I love the book. I think the movies are both two valid interpretations. I think Kubrick's is far better, but because of the casting, I personally think, Cronenberg wanted to direct it at one time. And
Oh, that would have
Cronenberg,
been interesting.
it would have been, to me,
Yeah.
brilliant. Because that's Adrian Lyne's best work. I've seen 6 or 7 of his movies, and he's kind of all flash. So I was like, he's going to do this as an erotic thriller. And some of it is, and he tones it down, and then he kind of, but
I read that
Cronenberg-
when they made it, Dominique Swain's mother was on the set and they put a pillow between them.
yeah, she was 15 when they shot that.
Yeah, I was gonna say she had to be 16 or 15, something. at the
She had
time.
actually just turned 15 when they started shooting.
Yeah, that's uncomfortable to me.
It is.
Yeah.
But they're trying for verisimilitude.
Sure,
And
sure.
like he said, they're trying to do safeguard. Like Jodie Foster was protected on set, but Jodie Foster didn't simulate
Right.
intercourse with Travis. Whereas the scene where they're rocking chair reading the paper is, I mean, you don't see their genitals, but I mean it's borderline uncomfortable.
Yeah. Well, and it should be, but I guess that's where the argument might sometimes probably comes up is, should you do that? I think that's where a lot of people's line hits, is that they're
Right.
like, this may
That's why people freaked out with Hound Dog with Dakota Fanning.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Well, and the thing is, it's the word foreseen or presaged by the scene in the Kubrick movie where they're in the hotel and they're finally, and she's like laying back and he's like kissing her, and just the whole thing, they're about to just fucking frame that. You don't see it; it cuts like all those old movies.
Right.
To me, it couldn't be more clear.
At least it didn't cut to a train going through a tunnel, right?
Or a piston in the machine shop. And hear him going, "Hey, mama, yahoo!" But, I want to ask you too about a movie that I'd like to cover sometime. I don't know if y'all have seen it. Have you seen the Sweet movie?
Yes.
You have?
Yeah.
Sweet movie.
Sweet movie. If you can find Sweet movie,
it's out on Criterion.
it is out on Criterion, but I don't know who has it for streaming. The Criterion Channel, I think, does. But don't kill yourself. But if you have a chance to find it, I would love to have a group talk about that, because that movie,
That film is creepy and it has like borderline child involvement.
yeah, but it also has like tons of political shit in it that's satirical as hell. It's funny. It's gross. I mean, it's got bodily fluids.
Yeah, I mean, it shows a close up on a guy pissing with his privates painted silver.
No.
It even has a crossover with Battleship Potemkin, because the last soldier of Olenchuk that survived the Potemkin comes through a time portal and meets Anna Planeta on her ship with Karl Marx's head on the prow. If you get a chance to look up some images, Keith, you'll trip out.
Oh yeah. I'm looking it up right now on my phone.
They cover the actress in chocolate.
Yeah.
She's naked. That's I have a
It
T-shirt
was
of that.
banned in many countries, including the UK.
I think it played here a week at our Manor Theater in 1975.
Yeah.
I don't know what the reaction was, but I saw it a long time ago, and it was the craziest movie I'd seen.
It obviously is polarizing. Rotten Tomatoes has it at 50%, which means you got half on one side,
Rotten
half on.
Tomatoes just lost
I
all
think-
credibility.
I
with
can't
me.
remember if I got it from the live. I saw it in the 90s. I got it on VHS because some guy was talking about it. I can't remember if he lent it to me or if I got it from the library, but I watched it. Like I was pretty disturbed by it.
I ordered a bootleg from Video Search, and I watched the hell out of that thing. And after my then girlfriend left, I was kind of in a depression, but I was starting to get work as a movie critic. I'm starting to get a little bit of pay for it. So I was working for Video Eyeball, which Bill White got me into. Bill and I were very entwined at that time. He lived in Charlotte. He left Charlotte in 99. So this is like 97, 98. And I'm like, they're like, we're going to do an Oscar issue of Video Eyeball. And we're just going to do like the alternate Oscars. Go as crazy as you want. So I'll have to screenshot and show you this stuff. I've been meaning to post them on some of the groups for a while, but I reviewed the Sweet movie. I took their like little structure of how they wanted it, and though this woman edited it and messed up a couple of the political terms, which takes a whole nother thing of the movie. But I'm going to tell you something. It was a proud moment for me because Dusan Makaveyev, the director, he read the review and he wrote back in the next issue in the letter page. And not only that, but he wrote it on a piece of paper and faxed it. And they gave me a copy of the fax. And then in the next issue, they printed it. And they apologized for changing some of my stuff. They're like, yeah, we kind of mangled Henry's description of an already just totally wild, crazy movie. But the director himself was very impressed. And he said that I was insightful. He said it was a delight to read. I got the movie, and I was like, I cried. And he died just a couple of years ago, but he's one of my heroes. And I've got all his movies on DVD still. Those are ones I'm not going to sell until I know they're upgrading. But doesn't seem to be any change. WR is on Criterion also. I have both of those. And then they also did one of those Eclipse sets with his other movies. Movies
Yeah,
that
I noticed this.
out are like Montenegro, which I've seen. Coca-Cola Kid is on Blu-ray. I've seen that. Manifesto I haven't seen. Gorilla Babes at Noon I haven't seen. I don't want to say he made one last one, but really it's those early 60s through up to Sweet Movie when he was doing the part of the kind of Czech Eastern Bloc underground and doing kind of satirical but political movies, mostly black and white, and then experimenting. And then we got to WR, his whole movie's about Wilhelm Reich. And it's part documentary about Wilhelm Reich and part a enactment of a character who follows Wilhelm Reich's sex positive communal beliefs of brotherhood and sisterhood. And she's a Soviet character and a revolutionary, and the sex. And it's really there's some powerful stuff in there. I will admit, Reich through that movie and other books of his really affected my outlet. I was a very sexually uptight person growing up. I'm totally the opposite now, as y'all can probably tell. But stuff like that at a certain age, my early 20s, was like, wow, people really think this. Women really think this. This is incredible. And yes, of course, once again, being a big fan of our man Farmer. I mean, he helped me too, man, because he was just like, religion, you got to deprogram it, man. Sex is great. The real sex perverts are the ones who are celibate. I don't know. I think he had permanent.
Oh, he had a strong bohemian streak for sure.
He's just what's the name of the collection that they did that had Fire in the Night and Jesus and Mars and the other book?
Something in the mirror.
I have it.
Outside in the mirror or something like that.
Did Chris send you one?
I've got it, but it's downstairs.
Chris sent me one, which is very kind, and man, I just ate it up because I had not read any of the ones in it. And I was trying to describe it to a friend who was interested in getting into Farmer.
The other in the mirror. The other in the mirror. That's it.
Fire in the Night. Fire in the Night's a a non-genre novel about a interracial relationship in the early '60s between, you correct me if I'm wrong, a white man and a black woman working a factory together.
Yep.
And I mean, Farmer's one of those guys. He's like Serling. Well, I don't know if I want to put it that way because I know he had issues with Serling. Maybe I shouldn't say that, but I think if the stars were aligned a little different, I think he could have had more of an impact media-wise than he did, and kind of a Serling-like impact in the sense of the way he could tell stories in genre or not in genre. He just preferred genre because Serling got famous from Patterns, which basically is a soap opera about the textile industry magnates. It's not really that interesting a plot, but it's got an arresting drama to the scenes.
Right.
Same with Heavyweight. I'm not into boxing, but that was extremely well done. And then he was like, now they're not gonna let me do anything else, so I got to go allegorical.
Well, that's probably for another broadcast, but yeah, Farmer was definitely in the mix with all of those guys. I mean, he was part of the whole Ray Bradbury, Harlan Ellison crowd back then. Even to the point that he was part of that round of sci-fi authors that were brought in for Star Trek by Gene Roddenberry, to help build the Bible initially. Like he had a copy of the Bible in his papers that they found when he finally passed. But in one of his collections, he's got a short story called Sketches Among the Ruins of My Mind, which was originally Star Trek story treatment that was rejected by Star Trek because they said, what, Kirk, you want Kirk to inadvertently kill all of these people on this planet with his mind? And it's like, you can't do that. So he took that, reworked it, and made it into a really cool short story. So he was there. He just never actually, like,
it's funny.
Sturgeon got a story on the show, but Ellison got a story on the show. Farmer never got his.
Well, Farmer did get a story on Twilight Zone, but they pulled it permanently.
Yeah,
which I did see it once when I was a kid. It's
and now that it's kind of I'm pulling now deep from my memory. I think Farmer also wrote I think he wrote an entire sequel script for Fantastic Voyage that has never seen light because Asimov decided to write a sequel novel like that. So there's
I like his Star Trek script that I read in Farmer Files.
Yeah.
But he didn't get one finished. But he did get the Twilight Zone one finished, and they told it. And of course, he was there for years, and rightfully so, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's hard because Farmer's such a iconoclast in his own way, like Ellison. He's kind of like he just tells it like it is, and that alienates some people when they're in the business, And he.
But anyway, that's probably a rabbit trail that deserves a show on its own, honestly.
But nice to touch on.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and wrap up, and I really appreciate everybody putting in some fantastic work and ideas.
Yeah, it's very interesting talk.
We're going to keep going, and I guess I'll go ahead and end the meeting. And
I have like a list of like the handful of adaptations where I thought the movie was better than the book.
We're going to do another one on this, but not immediately. It's definitely something to mind. I just want to say to anyone watching, please like and subscribe. Hit that thumbs up button. Subscribe. We need it. The algorithms are evil and mean and merciless. So
yes, they are.
Help us rise, and we will conquer the world of the whole film discussion. And it sounds like I'm kidding, but I'm serious. So I love you guys. I'll see you soon.
All right. Thanks, Henry. Bye, Scott.
Yeah. All right. You too, buddy.
It's